Hey Rebels, welcome to Blasphemous Nutrition. Consider this podcast your pantry full of clarity, perspective, and the nuance needed to counter the superficial health advice so freely given on the internet. I'm Aimee, the unapologetically candid host of Blasphemous Nutrition and a double-degreed nutritionist with 20 years experience. I'm here to share a more nuanced take on living and eating well to sustain and recover your health. If you found most health advice to be so generic as to be meaningless, or so extreme that it's unrealistic, and you don't mind the occasional F-bomb, you've come to the right place. From dissecting the latest nutrition trends to breaking down published research and sharing my own clinical experiences, I'm on a mission to foster clarity amidst all the confusion and empower you to have the health you need to live a life you love. Now let's get started. Tina Stinson is a life coach and host of the Soul Aligned Self-Care podcast. In this episode of Blasphemous Nutrition, Tina and I meet to discuss the complexity of learning how to create healthy boundaries, including how to recognize when you need to create boundaries and where you need to create boundaries, as well as the process and outcomes of doing so. Tina shares so many fantastic, relatable examples from her own life, offers clear strategies, and we get down into some real talk on what it means to claim your life and your time for what matters most to you. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to also listen to Tina's podcast, to subscribe to Blasphemous Nutrition if you have not done so already. And without further ado, here's the conversation. Tina Stinson, welcome to Blasphemous Nutrition.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited for a conversation.
Yeah, when you called yourself a boundary badass, I was like, whoa, stop the presses. I need this woman on my show. We got to talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why don't you share a little bit with our listeners how you came to don that identity and really integrate that as part of yourself. Were you born that way? Did you come by it through the school of hard knocks? What's
Yeah, it definitely was not born that way. So yeah, it was a necessity at some point in my life. But because I was in a very verbally abusive relationship for a long time, I learned to become somewhat of a professional people pleaser in order to protect myself and survive. And I feel like a lot of people do that, but I really mastered it. But I did it also in a way where I didn't even realize I was doing it. And coming out of that relationship and starting to rebuild my self-worth and connect with myself, I realized that I needed to set boundaries. And I learned that boundaries were the foundation of all my deep level self-care in order to help myself recover and survive. Coming out of that relationship, I did have a stroke, which led me to my health journey. And so the stroke was caused by stress. So I was just trying to figure out all these different ways where I could give myself the best odds, so to speak, to have a healthy, happy life where I was thriving and not just surviving. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the boundary badass came in. But it was a process. It was a really, really long process, because when you're in that people pleasing mode for a really, really long time, it's undoing something that you've been doing for a long time. So it takes time to undo the mindset, the whole thing around it. And it really kind of dismantles your life, because when you're a people pleaser and you're doing it almost like subconsciously, you're not really aware of it, you're doing it with everyone. And
Right.
So all of my relationships, and I had some really strong long-term relationships, even with my girlfriends and stuff like that, I realized were not really based on who I am. It was based on who I portrayed myself to be in order to make somebody else comfortable.
Wow. Yeah. So in that, and now I imagine really shook things up, not just for you, but again, for everyone around you, because they expected they expected you to be a certain way, right? And
Yeah.
when you make this decision, right, like you draw the line in the sand and you're like, okay, things have to change. It's for you. It was literally essentially a life or death situation that called you up to step into this. And, I'm imagining all these scenarios in my head where you come to this realization that how you behave in the world really has to change, and what you need to do to protect yourself necessitates changing how you relate to everyone. And I don't know if that happened all at once, or it was this sort of peeling back of the layers of realizing, oh, I'm doing it here. Oh, I'm doing it here. It's everywhere. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a little bit at a time. And the same goes for the shifting of the people in your life, because when I talk to people about boundaries, I always say a lot of people are afraid to set boundaries because they're afraid of losing friends and losing loved ones. And I'm like, if that person is meant to be in your life, they're going to be in your life. And if they're not, it's not going to be like this big, devastating final ending. It's going to shift over time and it fades out. So people fade in and people fade out. And the people that truly, truly love you and care about you are going to get upset when you set boundaries.
Yeah.
And what happens when you're a people pleaser is you automatically attract some of the worst kind of people. That doesn't mean if you're a people pleaser, everybody around you is bad. It just means that it does tend to attract somebody who's like a narcissistic personality. And so those are the people that are going to get really kind of pissed off when you start to grow a backbone and start to set those boundaries to protect your own well-being. And so it really does, it sounds scary when you talk about it, but in the long run, it is absolutely beautiful because you know the people that are meant to be, and you're surrounding the people that are there to build you up and support you, and you're good friends. And then the people who really weren't a good friend. And it doesn't mean that you might not ever talk to them again, but it does mean that you're going to limit and protect yourself. And so the setting of those boundaries is the key thing. And, I can't say it enough. Boundaries are the foundation to all that deep level self-care and your self-worth. It just really is like you could do all these different other self-care practices and all these other things to help yourself improve that love that you have for yourself. But if you don't have strong boundaries, it's going to be like this constant battle. So setting those boundaries to support yourself is just so important. It's like the foundation.
It reminds me very much of that analogy of using a pail to throw water out of a sinking ship, right?
Yes.
You can do everything that externally, right? But if you continue to allow people to overstep your boundaries, if you are aware of what they are, or take your time from you for their needs and not yours because you aren't advocating for your own needs, then you're left in a perpetual deficit that you're always scrambling to try and mitigate.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah, you can't really ever get ahead in that situation.
Yeah. So, and as you mentioned, sometimes it can be really hard to figure out where you need to set boundaries, because people might be like, yeah, I think I need to set boundaries. I'm constantly doing all these things for others. And so there's certain like questions that you can ask yourself. And there's the first step to anything is always awareness, right? And so there's certain questions you can ask yourself and certain behaviors you can keep your eye out for in yourself to first become aware of whether you need to set a boundary or not. And so some of the things I see from almost all people that need boundaries is they say things like, nobody appreciates me. Everybody always walks all over me. Right. And setting boundaries is like the strongest way you can call yourself out. It really is. Right. Because you're in that victim mode a little bit. And so it's like everybody walks all over me. Nobody appreciates me. I do all this stuff and nobody even sees it. If you find yourself saying that a lot, and especially with certain people, then that's a clue that you might need to set a boundary, right? And then another thing is if you find yourself like softening your personality or your behavior or restricting your personality behavior in front of certain people in order to avoid some kind of a crisis, it could be like somebody else's outburst or some kind of judgment or something like that, then that might be a place that you need to set a boundary and make a shift, right? And I always say there's a quote, I can't remember who said it, but you should never have to light yourself on fire to keep somebody else warm. And it's the perfect example. I can't remember who said it. But
it's so graphic, but something that graphic is needed in this situation, because I don't think it is so subtle and so accepted, right? Particularly among women, to be that people pleaser, that I think we don't often fully realize the extent to which it is self-harm to perpetually be in that position where you are sacrificing yourself for everybody else's needs and wants. And oftentimes it's not really their true needs that they're extracting from you. It's their whims and their desires because they know you're up to task to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that is really difficult I find with a lot of women is having them support their own boundaries. So like everybody is completely different, right? So everybody has a certain amount of stress they can take until they break. Everybody has a certain amount of uncomfortable situations that they can take before they end up, with disabling anxiety, Everybody is different. So my boundary might look different than your boundary. And when if you're around a person who doesn't want you to set a boundary because it takes away from their experience, then they're going to question the boundary and they're going to make you question yourself. And so they'll be like, that's a ridiculous boundary. How could you do that? How could you say that? Or whatever the challenge might be. But you have to know what's good for you and how much you could take. What I can take might not be as much as the person over there can take. It might just, maybe I'm soft, maybe I tend towards stress and anxiety, which I do, right? So I know how I feel in my body. And so setting these boundaries is almost like learning to trust yourself and how you feel again, because you really have to like tune in to how your body feels. And it tells you when something doesn't feel right, right? And sometimes boundaries shift. So when you go through a healing period and you start to reduce your stress, you start to set boundaries, you have more tolerance for certain things, and you might not need to like set boundaries as strong as they are to protect your energy. So say, even as something like a boundary with yourself or something is like, when I go to a party, I can go to a party for 2 hours and have a really good time. But after that party, I'm spent. So don't plan an activity after a party. Or if you have to, if you have a meeting with a person, or sometimes if I have a difficult client, it could really, really suck the life out of me. I love my clients, but I take on their emotions, right? And I know this about myself. So I respect the boundary I set is I'm going to create space after that client so that I could do some breath work or go for a run or go for a walk to release the energy because I'm taking on their emotions. And so I know this about myself. Now, not everybody's like that, right? But I am. And so I don't take on as many clients just to protect my energy and my well-being, right? So boundaries aren't just about trying to get somebody else to behave a certain way for yourself. It's about protecting the energy around you. And I think one of the hardest concepts to kind of absorb is that when it comes to boundaries, it's 100% your responsibility. It's not anybody else's responsibility to respect, I'm using quote marks right now, respect your boundary. It's not about I set a boundary and they didn't listen to me and that's it. They don't respect me. And it's not about that, because if a person cares about you, they're going to figure out that you want to change a certain behavior. And it doesn't happen instantaneously when you set a boundary. Most people are so focused on themselves that they're not doing this on purpose to you. They don't mean you harm. And so part of setting, I always say setting and maintaining about boundaries, part of that setting is maintaining it. Like part of it's a complete process. If you don't maintain it, there's no boundary. And so, so it's like you have to go through the continuous process of saying, listen, when you do this, this is how it makes me feel. And I just want to share that with you. And if you keep doing this, then I'm not going to be able to continue this conversation or whatever. And there's ways to do it where you don't sound like you're like laying the law down or something like this. You're really sharing with the other person that you might not be trying to make me feel this way, but this is the experience I'm having. And so this is what I'm going to do every time you do that. And then when they do it, then you have to maintain it by reminding them, this is what I'm going to do now because, this doesn't work for me.
Exactly.
And there's boundaries that you set in your business. So I always use this example because it was a hard lesson for me to learn. So I used to sell real estate and I was a single mom with 3 kids. And so if I like with real estate, you only make money when you're selling something. You don't have a salary or anything like that. And so it's really hard to contain yourself and take time off. And so one of the boundaries that I set with my clients and with myself is that after, I don't remember what time it was, but after 6:00, I'm not going to be taking any calls and I will return the call the next day. And the only time that wasn't the case was if I was in the middle of a negotiation, because you can't do that when you're negotiating, right? So that was the recording on my phone when people called me. Right. And, when your cell phone rings, you could see who's calling you and you're like, it's so difficult to like not answer the phone if it's a client or something like that, because you're so afraid of losing that client. But I set that boundary so that I had time with my family. So it wasn't just about other people respecting my boundary. It was about me respecting my boundary. And the second I answer that phone, I'm not respecting my own boundary and there's no boundary anymore.
Yeah.
And
we teach others how to treat us.
Exactly.
And when we've been doing it one way for so long, it often does take repetition and consistency to teach them to treat us differently and to treat ourselves differently as well.
Yeah.
Because that again, like when you set a boundary for yourself and you violate that boundary you have created for yourself, nobody's going to know but you.
Exactly.
And if you don't, I think if you don't value and respect yourself enough at the onset, you can effectively become as harmful to yourself as someone else could be to you, because again, you're not respecting your own boundaries that you're setting for yourself with very good intention to get your life to a place you want it to be. And do you have any words of wisdom, anything that you can share in that area of developing that resiliency with yourself, right? Because again, nobody's watching you. And I mean, I think in your situation, it was such a severe wake-up call that I imagine as soon as I'm imagining this, but I don't know that to be true, that as soon as you were realizing there was a boundary that needed to be made and what that boundary was, you were making it and holding to it. Because the consequences, but I don't know that. And I'm certain you've worked with people who haven't had such a severe wake-up call and struggle with maintaining the boundaries that they're setting for themselves. Would you have any advice or pearls of wisdom that you could share?
Well, it really, there's so many different topics that kind of relate to each other. So you have the boundaries, you have that connection with yourself, almost like that gut intuition. And then you have your self-worth and your self-love. And they're all like connected in that way. And I would agree with you that when you don't respect your own boundaries with yourself, it could be as harmful. I would go even further and say it's almost more harmful, because your relationship with yourself is the most important relationship that you can have. Yeah. And reminding yourself of that is like the first step to before you even set those boundaries with the other people. You have to have respect for your own time and your health. And so it's about It's about the process of continuously, it's almost changing a limiting belief. It's like this continuous process. So like you've had this behavior. So it's almost like a river that's been flowing in a certain direction for a long time. And it creates that groove and it's over there. And then you're trying to change that behavior and to make it go into a more positive direction. It's going to take a little time to create that groove. And so I feel like that one of the first things that you have to realize is that you have to be kind to yourself when you're trying to set these boundaries, because if you're doing it in a way where you're like, I did it again, I wasn't able to do it. It's more about looking at what happened and then you saying to yourself, okay, what did I learn here? Because it's going to pop up in all these different situations, like so many different situations, right? So what did I learn here? And what's the shift I need to make in order to move forward and have better success the next time? And the kindness part is like so huge, and there's going to be so many, I don't like using the word failure because people have defined it in such a negative way, but you don't have success without failure. And so the more times you fail, the better. So the more times you fail setting boundaries with yourself and with others, the more you're going to learn about yourself and other people. And the more you'll move faster towards success if you do that. And so I think the biggest thing, there's no secret thing that you can do. I think the most important thing is to be kind to yourself and make it a point to reflect every time you think that it didn't go the way it was supposed to, or you have a failure, but exactly what can I do different? Like, how can I shift? How can I make this easier for myself to move through, Using a very simplistic example of the phone call. So like I get a phone call from a client and I'm not in the middle of a deal with them, but I knew they were getting ready to write an offer or something like that. And they call me at 7:30 at night and, oh my God, I didn't close any deals this month yet. So what do? I answer the phone and I'm like, okay, well, how could I make that boundary work better? So what I could do is I'm working closely with this client. I know they're going to write an offer soon. Tell them I have a policy. I don't answer the phone after 6:00 at night. If you need anything, make sure you call me before 6:00 at night. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to talk to you till the next morning. And so you're just looking at how can I make that work better for myself so it's not as painful. Now that person knows that if you don't answer the phone, it's not that you don't want to write the offer for them. That's your boundary. And people respect that.
And they often admire it, I think, because
yes, they do.
Particularly with work, boundaries have become so non-existent in so many different areas.
Yes.
That someone who's willing to maintain some is, maybe they're not, depending on the personality, maybe they're not necessarily admired for it, but they will be respected. Whether a coworker agrees with your boundary or thinks it's okay or not okay or casts judgment or doesn't, on some level, they will respect you for standing up for yourself.
Yeah. And like using the same example, moving into a negotiation process with a client who knows that you have boundaries isn't going to try to walk all over you during the process. And they know that other people aren't going to walk all over you either, and so they know that you're the person for the job. And so there's just so many benefits to setting boundaries. Now, going into the workplace, it could be I've worked with people trying to set boundaries in the workplace, and it's really, really hard when I was employed by myself. So nobody's going to fire me, So setting boundaries with a tough boss is really difficult. And it's almost like, so like say you're being overworked, you're being handled all these projects, and then you're like, you can't even get it done in a 50-hour work week, let alone a 40-hour work week. And this person comes up to you and says, here's another project. And it's like, how are you supposed to handle that? And it's like, well, you could say something like, oh, which one of these projects is your priority? Because I want to give you my best work. So if you're giving me this as your priority, then I'm going to have to put this project, so-and-so project, on hold in order to get this done for you because I want to give you my best work. So it's not like saying, no, I can't do this. It's saying, well, if you want me to do this, then I have to let go of something over here. And so there's it's almost like all these little micro conversations that you have to have with a person in order to get it across without saying, screw you, I'm done. Like, we're supposed to, and sometimes there's no resolution and it's about finding a different job. And so I would say those are very difficult boundaries to set. Personal relationships also for obvious reasons, emotional reasons, are so difficult to set boundaries with people, especially with children and parents. I had trouble setting boundaries with my children, but especially when I was a single mom, because you're always like in this position of almost feeling like they're being shortchanged because they don't have both parents in the household. And you feel like, I don't know if feeling sorry for them is the right wording for it, but you almost feel like you have to overcompensate as a single parent. So it was really hard for me to set boundaries with my kids, saying no to things. And I was lucky enough to have really great kids that didn't take advantage of that. But it is difficult to do, and it could be a real struggle. But there's steps that you can take to get comfortable in the process. And I always tell people, make a list. The awareness is the first thing. So those questions that I talked about at the beginning, and it's like, take note of those situations and those people, and then notice the patterns. So I noticed that with this friend of mine, like, she always does this over and over and over and over again. That's a pattern. That's where you need to set a boundary. If it only happens once and then it never happens again, I wouldn't even be concerned about it. But if it's something that's continuous, and you might know, like, off the top of your head, yeah, I know who I need to set a boundary with, right?
Yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of listeners who are already like, oh, yeah, that's
yeah. Yeah. And so it's like, I would make a list. I'm a list person. Not everybody's a list person, but I would make a list. And you could do it in a couple of different ways. If you've never set a boundary and you're really nervous about it, you could start really, really small with a very easy one. And I would go as far, because I did this, as coming up with a script. Write it out. What are you going to say to that person? And if you know the person really well, what are they going to say back? And how are you going to handle it? How are you going to move forward? And practicing that script in the mirror, or even with another person who supports you. Supports you is the key word. Yeah. And getting comfortable with saying it to yourself before you say it to someone else. I was so beaten down that it was so hard for me to set boundaries. So hard. And once I started setting boundaries with that person I was in a relationship with, they did not like that at all, and it actually brought an easier end to the relationship than if I if I just cut it off completely, at that point, because they were the type of person that you attract when you're a people pleaser, that liked to take advantage of that. And if he wasn't going to get that from me, he was going to go find that somewhere else. And so then that brought the relationship to an end. And so it doesn't have to be this big, huge, dramatic experience or ending. And so just taking those baby steps. Or if you're very uncomfortable and you have a little bit of confidence in yourself and you're like, this boundary right here is the one that's going to make me feel so much better if I set that one first, even if it's a big one or a hard one. But still do the script, practice the different scenarios, practice how you're going to manage your emotions when you go through it. How are you going to not yell if the other person's like a yeller, and maybe that's even part of the boundary? How are you not going to yell back? And I always tell people it's perfectly acceptable to do what feels best for you. And if you need to end the conversation and say something like, listen, I just need a little space right now. Can we talk again about this later? Even if that person is in a fit of rage, and then say, I need to remove myself from this situation, and I will talk later, and just remove yourself from the situation. And whatever feels right for you is acceptable, because you are the person who makes the rules for you, not society, not this other person, not the way you were trained as a child. And I say trained because women are trained to be very submissive and very people pleasing. And so it's about really getting to know yourself and how you feel in your body. And then also being honest at the same time, not taking advantage of boundaries, using it to just block people out that so you don't have to deal with an uncomfortable situation that should be dealt with, you know?
That's an excellent point, because we are in the middle of a, what we call cancel culture, where the standard practice these days seems to be to just cut someone off rather than give yourself and that other person the respect and dignity of letting them know why. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Something else that also came up for me when you were talking about leaving was, getting out of a situation if someone won't respect your boundaries, is that can literally mean hanging up on them, getting in your car and driving away if you have to, right?
Yeah.
When you need to get out of a situation to recollect yourself, right? To get regrounded. I know for myself, one of the things that I struggled with when I was learning boundaries was that if I was in an argument with someone and they were starting to dominate, I would disappear. I would completely almost go out of my body and disappear. And then it was whatever they needed to calm down so that I could feel safe again. Right. And when I started getting that kind of that internal voice was getting a little bit louder, and I was more connected to myself, and I was ready to change that situation, I had to physically, this was back when you didn't you hung up the phone and then left the receiver.
Yeah.
Yeah. Way back in the day. Leave the phone off the hook and, get in my car and physically leave the premises, because I could not stand up for myself if I wasn't connected to myself. And I couldn't continue the conversation in the manner that I needed to if I was in that high level of reactive mode, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I had to come back to myself.
Yeah. It's so important. Yeah. And talking about the cancel culture thing again, too, also, yeah, it's sometimes as soon as you start making assumptions about someone else's behavior, you're in trouble, right? Because you don't know, and you can't when going back to the comment, nobody appreciates me, everyone walks all over you. Probably not true. Probably not true, because it's just you not creating the boundary. And human nature is to okay, well, she does this all the time, so it's okay.
Right.
Human nature. It's not that they don't like you or they don't appreciate you. Right. So if we're assuming someone's behaving a certain way for a certain reason, then we're already losing. So it's more, instead of just canceling them out, it's about having the conversation with them. Even a person that's being somewhat, I'm not saying to stay around an abuser, but a person that's yelling and losing control of their emotions in that way, they might be in a lot of pain. And if you can show that you can have a conversation with them in a calm manner, they might reflect that back to you. Now, if that doesn't happen, then yeah, of course, remove yourself from the situation. But you might connect on a deeper level in that relationship, And if you're just gonna walk away from it because you're uncomfortable, I really, it's every situation is different, and I feel like I'm walking on thin ice here, because if you're in a domestic violence situation, then you need to get help in that situation. So I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about the person that you're close with, who might be having a situation, might be having some kind of they might need help. And so not to completely write it off, try to have the difficult conversation. Don't shy away from the difficult conversations. I know it's so icky and it can make your skin crawl, but they can be so powerful sometimes and bring you closer to a good friend instead of losing a good friend,
Exactly.
So it's every situation is different, and you have to be able, once again, to connect into your body and know what's right for you in that moment. And if it's walking away, if it's going into another room, if it's hanging up the phone, whatever it is, or if it's trying to, in a calm voice, continue the conversation, then that's what you should try to do. So I would encourage people to not always make assumptions about other people and how they're feeling until you've actually asked them to express that to you.
Yeah, exactly. Have them explicitly state to you what is going on for them.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel if you feel like you can, like, say, this is what I'm perceiving from you, right? This is
Mm-hmm.
making this assumption, but I want to check that assumption. Is
Yeah.
this true?
Yeah.
I think those conversations are so terrifying. Honesty is terribly scary, but
Mm-hmm.
every time that I've been honest, even when I feel like I'm going to puke,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's always been the best thing that I possibly could have done. And
Mm-hmm.
what you said about making friendships closer, it's true. The depth of friendship and love that happens when you can show up honestly
Mm-hmm.
and just be like, this is who I am, this is how I feel, and they receive that and they accept that. The level of trust that's developed is so deep. And that person, in seeing you doing it, is also more willing and more likely to go a layer deeper with you, right?
Exactly. Somebody has to take the first step.
Yeah. And we're all
Yeah.
terrified. We're all
Yep.
terrified to take the first step.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I always say there's always magic on the other side of discomfort. And like you said, anytime I'm scared to do something, I look at it and I'm like, it's probably exactly what I'm supposed to do. It's almost always, I'm not telling people to jump, go pet the lion, but it's, like, for example, when I first started my podcast, I did solo shows only. And I was terrified to do guest episodes, absolutely terrified, because I was a little intimidated by the technology and I didn't want to embarrass myself and I wanted to remain professional. And so it took me a while. And so I eased myself into it by having people I know on first to make it easy. But I knew that that was the one step I needed to take to grow, even though it was terrifying to me. And it's, like I said, there's always magic on the other side. The amount of amazing people, like I met you, obviously, right? The amount of amazing people I get to talk to and meet, and I've made friends. So it's like, I'm like, it's amazing. So, and if I just remained like scared and in that place, I would have never met all of these amazing people and had different opportunities presented to me. And so I always, whenever I feel that fear, I'm always like, oh, I'm so scared to do something. And I recently said this somewhere else. I don't even remember where I said this, but it's kind of like when you have to jump in the pool and the pool is cold and there's the people, and I'm one of these people. So I'm not like coming down hard on you or anything, but you stick your foot in and then you ease yourself in and then you're trying to get comfortable, and it's like torture. It's like slow torture. And then when you get to the belly part, it's like freezing and you're like, oh my God. And then dipping your head under is like the worst part. When I know for a fact that I could just jump in really fast and within like a minute, I'm going to acclimate to the water. And then, I remember doing this when I was a kid, like swimming at night. Then you're in the water and actually you get comfortable with the temperature of the water. And then when you come out of the water, it's cold and the water feels warm. So it's like such a perfect metaphor, because once you make that big step and you grow, you become comfortable in that expanded position. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's all about, right? Isn't that what life's all about? Is about growing and trying new things and moving forward. And so fear is always like a sign of something, you know what I mean? The sign of something. And it could be, like I said, magic on the other side. And taking those steps, even when it comes to being like, I talked about how I was a people pleaser with my friends, where I just morphed my personality into what I thought they liked. Right. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I noticed that was like an aha moment for me when I started showing up as myself was that all my friends were so different that if I put them all in a room, they probably wouldn't get along. And it's because I wasn't attracting people that were like me. It was because I was morphing myself into what they were. It was such a like weird realization. I had that moment where when I realized like I was segregating my parties and my yes,
And I was like, I was scared to have them all come together because what would they think of each other? And then what would they think of me if they knew I was friends with that person, right? And then
Exactly. Yes.
oh, so much drama in my head.
Yeah. And it's so much energy that you're wasting just by not being yourself, not showing 100% authentic, like uncensored version of yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And you're real. That's really what your purpose is here. Like you were born here. There's nobody else like you in this time period. Like you're completely unique. Why would you not show up as yourself? Like I spent so much of my life not showing up as myself. I just feel like I was meant to learn this lesson so to share it with other people, because otherwise what a waste it would be. And so when you have a friend that seems so different from you and you show up a certain way in order to be accepted by that person, or you think if I show up as myself, they're not going to like me anymore, try it out. Like, so I love this example. So say that you're like inside, you're a closet spiritual person, like you're super woo woo and you like all the crystals and stuff, and you like the tarot cards and you love talking to psychics and stuff like that. But you have this really conservative friend that you've been good friends with for 20 years, and they think that stuff is just all a bunch of BS. At least that's your assumption, right? Mm-hmm. But then one day you have the courage to talk about an experience you had, and then they say back to you, oh my God, I love that. I love reading my horoscope, or I love, whatever. And then think about it. You don't lose a friend. And then you have this deeper connection with them where you get to share this whole other side of yourself with them. So why not just show up like that in the first place? And it might not turn out that way. They could look at you and be like, whatever, okay. But then keep showing up that way. Maybe they'll embrace it. Maybe they won't. But the point is, don't you want to surround yourself with the type of people who are meant to be around you, right? And not like some kind of choreographed life that isn't really honest,
Awesome. I feel like I needed that today. This podcast is still new, and it took me, I think I first thought about doing a podcast, I want to say it was probably 2019. So it took me a hot minute to actually drive up the ovarian juice necessary to hit it.
Yeah. It's hard.
It is. And I knew if I was going to do this, I really needed to do it from a place of being authentic and being real with all of my blasphemous, scandalous opinions. And it was a really long time before I felt like I could do that and be strong enough to handle whatever came back at me by dad. Yeah. And now that I'm a couple months in, I'm catching myself starting to censor myself again. So I really appreciate you showing up and reminding me not to do that.
It's a continuous process. Like I have to continuously remind myself to do things like that. And I think it's just, it's a part of being human. You know what I mean? But the more that you can call yourself, it's so much easier to just show up as yourself. It's so much less work. It's part of, like what I do is like help people reduce stress and anxiety, overwhelm and burnout, right? That's like my main goal, is to help people avoid what I went through. And when you reduce the amount of energy you're putting towards being inauthentic or whatever you want to call it, you just feel more relaxed. There's less stress. It's just so much better. And it's a hard shift to make. And it's a gradual shift, and it's a lifetime process, just like everything is. Your health, right? Eating, nutrition, physical exercise, everything is a lifetime process that you have to continuously work on. So it's part of it.
Definitely. Is there a question that I haven't asked you that you wish I had asked you?
Not really. I think this was a really great conversation about boundaries. I got to really express myself fully. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. I'm so passionate about it.
My pleasure. I'm really grateful that you had so many wonderful suggestions and examples for listeners, because I think for those who are in that place where they know that something needs to be done and they are not really sure how to start about it, how to go and do that, having those examples and those ideas for them to begin that process is so, so helpful, because clear boundaries are not well modeled.
Yeah, no, especially for women, like you said, it's really hard. And some of the people I work with are in their 60s and their 70s, and so it's like never too late to start the process. I started in my 40s, you know what I mean? So
yeah, it is never too late. And it does not matter. Doesn't matter how old you are. If you're still alive, you have opportunities for better friendships, for better relationships, for a better life for yourself, as long as you're breathing. That opportunity exists.
Yeah, and the world needs that version of you. Like, that's why you're here. So
yeah, we do need our elders to be kicking some ass. That's for sure.
Oh my God. Yes, we do. We need them right now, like fully.
Someone's got to get these young people into shape.
Yeah. They need all the support they can get. It's a tough world right now. So
For sure. What is the biggest takeaway that you hope listeners get from our conversation today?
I really hope that they start to examine and just become aware of where they might need to set a boundary, and that they remember to always be kind with themselves as they're moving through the process, taking those baby steps. Just remember to be really kind with yourself.
Thank you so much, Tina.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Yeah. I've got one last question for you, though. I'm not letting you off the hook yet.
Uh-oh. Okay.
What is one thing about you that others would find blasphemous?
Oh, I got a good one. I really do. That I am a garlic farmer.
Really?
Yes. I'm very new at it, but I do. I have a garlic farm and an herbal farm. Like, I grow herbs and stuff like that. And yeah, this year I have 1,000 bulbs planted, and my son is partnering up with me because I did 400 last year, and boy, was that a lot of work. So he's partnering up with me this year. Yeah. So I'm the garlic queen.
I have so many questions. So my undergraduate biochemistry professor would have such a wonderful time talking with you.
Yeah.
She did research on garlic. And yeah, she was absolutely enamored with garlic, as one should be.
Yes, I love garlic, and it's so healing, and it adds so much flavor. It's so powerful. Yeah. And then I got into the herbs too. So I make my skincare out of my herbs. Herbs add a lot of, as you know, nutrition into your diet. And so they're so powerful, so beautiful. And garlic is so easy to grow. I would encourage everyone to try to grow garlic at some point. Just make sure you're always using organic when you're growing it. But yeah, it's so easy to grow. It's so rewarding. It's amazing. I find it amazing that you put one clove of garlic in the ground, and then in one season you have this whole bulb. Like, I'm always amazed by seeds. Like, I'm fascinated. So I'm definitely a hobby farmer, that I love it. But this year I'm actually going to the farmer's market and selling my stuff. So
I was going to say 1,000 bulbs of garlic seems a little aggressive for a hobby.
Yes. Yeah. So we make the garlic braids, those beautiful braids. Yeah. And I make these balls out of not everybody wants 10 to 12 bulbs of garlic. Like, not everybody's like me, like a crazy garlic person. But so I make these little bulbs, and then I decorate them with some of the flowers that I grow on the farm. So I grow like straw flowers that are like dried flowers, already dried, and just make these beautiful creations. So yeah, I really enjoy it, and it's so peaceful being out in my garden. I love doing it.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that about yourself. That's awesome.
Sure. Yeah, I love it. Sure.
Well, Tina, I'm so glad to have had you on, and I'm going to figure out a reason to have you back, because I really appreciate all of the wisdom and the tangible, actionable steps that you've offered our listeners today, and I'm certain that they would benefit from hearing more.
Oh, I would love to come back. I enjoy talking to you too.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
If you have found some nuggets of wisdom, make sure to subscribe, rate, and share Blasphemous Nutrition with those you care about. As you navigate the labyrinth of health advice out there, remember, health is a journey, not a dietary dictatorship. Stay skeptical, stay daring, and challenge the norms that no longer serve you. If you've got burning questions or want to share your own flavor of rebellion, slide into my DMs. Your stories fuel me, and I love hearing them. Thanks again for tuning into Blasphemous Nutrition. Until next time, this is Aimee signing off, reminding you that truth is nuanced and any dish can be made better with a little bit of sass.